afternoon and welcome to the November 15th, 2023 meeting of the Eugene City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this virtual meeting format. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling in to one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. And thank you again for joining us. And with that, I call this work session to order, and I will turn it over to the city manager to introduce the first item.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, our first item is actually to continue the conversation on riverfront urban renewal, and we have amazing Amanda D'Souza here to kick off and lead that presentation. Thanks for being here, Amanda.
Thanks, Sarah. Hopefully you see those slides. Good afternoon. I'm Amanda D'Souza, and I am the Development Programs Manager in the Community Development Division. And as Sarah said, today we're here to continue the discussion about the proposed amendment to the Riverfront Urban Renewal Plan. I'll recap where we are in the Urban Renewal Amendment process. You started this discussion in November of last year when you considered the future of the Riverfront District and directed staff to bring back a proposed amendment. In September, you considered a draft proposed amendment, including 3 possible spending scenarios, each with a different increase to the spending limit. I'll recap those in a little bit. At that work session, the agency board formally initiated the plan amendment process, choosing to seek feedback on all 3 spending scenarios. The plan amendment process requires several outreach steps, including notifying the general public, seeking concurrence from the overlapping taxing districts, presenting to Planning Commission, and holding a public hearing. We also convene the River Guides, the advisory committee for the Riverfront Urban Renewal District, to get their feedback. Those steps happen from September to November, and I'll touch on them later. Today, you'll have an opportunity to review the comments, further refine the amendment if needed, and choose the spending scenario you'd like to move forward with. You currently have another work session scheduled for November 27th to consider taking action on the ordinance amending the Riverfront Urban Renewal Plan. I'll quickly provide a recap of what's in the proposed amendment, but before I do that, I'll orient you to the relevant documents. You're considering the proposed ordinance in Attachment A, which would amend the Riverfront Urban Renewal Plan. Exhibit A to the ordinance is the actual plan, which incorporates the amendments, including the proposed project focus area and the 3 spending scenarios. Exhibit B is the report on the urban renewal plan, which includes information on the district's current conditions and the financial impact of the amendment. And finally, we conducted a blight analysis of the Riverfront District, and those findings are in Exhibit C. I'll briefly touch on the proposed project focus areas included in the plan amendment. I'll just give a high-level summary here, but there's more information in the plan and in Attachment B. As you'll remember, the proposed project focus areas in the proposed amendment are split into 2 categories. The first is existing activities, which include supporting the adaptive reuse of the steam plant, supporting the Downtown Riverfront Affordable Housing Project, which includes a minimum of 75 units affordable to 60% of area median income. The activities that would be new to the plan are the 3 focus area buckets carried over from the Downtown Urban Renewal Amendment. Since the western portion of the Riverfront Plan area includes a number of urban blocks that can be considered part of the downtown core, and many of the challenges in downtown are present in the riverfront, we strategically included these so the same set of tools would be available in the Riverfront District as well. Additional housing includes development fee assistance and real property acquisition and disposal. Physical improvements to address safety and comfort includes projects in the right-of-way that create safe, accessible, and welcoming spaces. And the final bucket is projects directed or initiated by the agency board. And these include projects previously discussed by council and that align with the downtown priorities and projects. There were a couple of items related to the project focus areas that came up at the September 13th work session. First, you discussed exploring the use of urban renewal dollars to support City Hall improvements. Based on your discussion, and as allowed in the current plan, the proposed amendment continues to include the category of, quote, other public facilities as eligible projects in all 3 spending scenarios. Continuing to include this means the agency board will still be able to use urban renewal funds for public facilities if they choose to do so. Second, there was a request for more information about how additional funding would be used to support redevelopment of the STEAM plan. There are significant costs with historic preservation of the building and including spaces that would be accessible to the whole community. Attachment B includes more details about public benefits the STEAM plant development team identified that could only be possible with the additional funding. As examples, that it could include restoration of the factory sash windows and inclusion of a public rooftop observation deck. As you know, the proposed amendment includes 3 possible spending scenarios, each with a different increase to maximum indebtedness or spending limit. If you would like to continue considering amending the Riverfront Urban Renewal Plan, we're asking you to provide direction on which spending scenario to move forward with so we can prepare the final ordinance for your consideration later this month. I'll walk through those scenarios. Spending scenario A is focused on completion of the 2 outstanding downtown riverfront projects, the STEAM plant and affordable housing. This scenario assumes most of the spending limit increase would be allocated to those 2 projects, with a small amount of money available for any projects initiated by the agency board. This scenario includes a $15 million increase to the spending limit, which is estimated to extend the district by 5 years. Spending scenario B includes those 2 outstanding projects, but also includes the 3 focus area buckets: housing, physical improvements, and agency board projects. Under this scenario, the spending limit would increase by $25 million, estimated to extend the district by about 8 years. Spending scenario C is similar to B, but with a higher spending limit increase of $45 million and more funds allocated to the new focus area buckets, especially housing. It's estimated that this would extend the district by about 15 years. I again won't spend too long on this slide, but it's a summary of what's included in each spending scenario. As part of the amendment process, we have to estimate how much is allocated to each project and activity, but the actual amounts will depend on future agency board action. All of these are scalable based on the agency board's interest. You'll note the project numbers don't add up to the spending limit increase, and that's because we've budgeted about 10 to 15% of the spending limit increase to project delivery costs. So far, I've covered information you've already heard. Now I'll talk about our outreach. State law requires a substantial plan amendment process to increase the plan's spending limit and outlines required outreach steps. First, we notified all of the overlapping taxing districts of the proposed amendment. Lane County discussed the amendment on October 17th and were generally supportive, discussing the fiscal impacts and redevelopment of the STEAM plant as a needed commitment to economic development. The 4J School Board discussed the proposed amendment on October 18th, and they had questions about the concurrence process and the type of housing that could be supported. The school board voted to concur with the proposed amendment on November 1st. No other comments were received from the other taxing districts, which include Lane Community College, Lane ESD, and the Upper Willamette Soil and Water Conservation District. Next, we were required to present to and seek feedback from the Eugene Planning Commission. The planning commissioners discussed the proposed amendment's alignment with existing plans and policies, and they approved a motion recommending adoption of the proposed amendment. The next piece was outreach to the general public. A notice of the proposed amendment and public hearing were mailed to all Eugene property owners. Council held a public hearing on October 16th. There were 6 speakers. All were supportive of the amendment, and those who commented on the spending limit proposed scenario C or higher. All written comments in the proposed amendment received as of November 1st are included in attachment D. Finally, we presented to the River Guides, who advise on the activities in the Riverfront Urban Renewal District. We presented them on October 20th. They discussed the fiscal implications of the proposed amendment, how urban renewal would be used to support the creation of new housing and city hall accessibility innovations, next steps for the STEAM plant, and they also encouraged investment in multimodal infrastructure instead of additional parking. They voted to recommend approving the proposed plan amendment using spending scenario C. As I've mentioned, if council would like to continue the plan amendment process, we are asking for direction on which spending limit increase you'd like to move forward with so that we can prepare the final ordinance for your possible action. With that, we'll hand it back to you for any questions.
Thank you very much. I actually appreciated that that very discreet and very succinct outline of where we are and what is before us today. So, are there counselors with questions or comments on this topic? Counselor Yeh, Jennifer.
Thank you. So Amanda, as you mentioned, we had some comments about considering an even higher limit, and I'm wondering if staff had an opportunity to discuss that and what your thoughts are about, positives and negatives. I know we'd have to go back and kind of do all that talking to folks again, which sounds like it's about maybe 1 or 2 months worth of work. So just what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So if council did want to do a higher spending limit increase than 45 million, there are basically 2 ways to accomplish this. You could either do it now or later. Doing it now does have some risk to it because we have to go back to 4J to get an updated concurrence for their spending limit. That would take about a month, which would push council's decision into the new year. And doing that means there's risk the ordinance wouldn't go into effect if it does get referred to the ballot. So there's some risk associated, but that hasn't happened in Eugene before. But that's the short version.
Okay. And are there any other negatives that you can think of? I mean, I realize it's like off the top of your head.
I think that's probably the biggest. Council can always choose to revisit the spending limit in a few years once stuff is going. I think there's a lot we could do with $45 million too. So those are, I think, the main factors.
Okay, so I guess I'll just share my thoughts. One of the things I've learned being on council is things are incredibly more expensive than you would think they would be. And planning takes a lot longer than you would think. 15 years goes by so fast, is what I've learned. And so my concern is that this area is only just starting to be developed and we don't necessarily know what we're going to need to do. I mean, there may be infrastructure things that for connectivity that we haven't considered. Anyways, my preference is to go for a higher level. I'm not sure how other counselors feel about that, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, thank you. Mike. And then
Thank you, Mayor. I like being able to say this. I agree entirely with Jennifer. I think we're at the point of realizing plans that we've had as a community for a very, very long time. I think this is a once in a generation kind of moment, and the opportunity to develop even more housing than we've talked about so far. And frankly, to my way of thinking, more commercial opportunities along the riverfront enhances our community dramatically, economically and otherwise. And so I'm certainly in favor of a higher number. I don't know what that number is. I'd call it 100 million today. I don't know what the right number is, but I'm certainly willing to consider where my colleagues think that rests if a majority thinks that's appropriate for us to consider the higher number. I certainly do. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Randy, and then Lindsay.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with both Jennifer and Mike. I would like to see a higher number. I'm just concerned what that will do. Amanda, first of all, thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate how streamlined it was. It was direct and to the point, and that's always helpful. But I guess I need a better understanding of what that would do to delays. And you indicated it may even call into question whether we are able to go forward. I recognize we need approval from the other districts, especially 4J, but can you speak to that just a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think the risk that's associated with it, 4J was supportive of the amendment. They didn't have concerns, as I think we've explained in the past. The fiscal impacts is they actually end up better for the existence of the district. So I'm not too concerned. I'm not too concerned about getting their concurrence. The risk that's associated with it is that if we've built in enough time that allows it to get referred and to hit the May election or get onto the May ballot so that the vote happens well before the district is set to sunset. And so the risk is if council decides to amend the plan, let's say in January, and someone does decide to collect signatures to refer it, there's a chance it wouldn't hit the May ballot. And then the ordinance would, I feel like Lauren could probably explain this a little bit better than I can, but it wouldn't hit the ballot in time for a vote to happen before it sunsets, if that makes sense.
Okay. Lauren, did you have more to add to that, or is that cover it?
No, Amanda did a good job. So
Okay,
as
great.
was the current plan has a sunset date of next summer, June 24, right? And so if the council were to adopt an ordinance amending the plan, and if that ordinance were to be referred, and if that were to happen on a timeline such that the public couldn't make a decision prior to June of 2024, then we're under the current plan, which has this sunset date. So that is the risk. I don't know how how risky that risk really is, but that was something that staff planned for initially in terms of timing and asking council to take action just to make sure that if an ordinance were referred, it would all be done prior to the sunset date. The longer we push out, the more uncertain that timing becomes.
Well, then, under the philosophy of bird in the hand's worth two in the bush, talk to us a little bit more about if we go with the 45 million cap and what it would look like if we needed to expand that at a later date.
Yeah, so I would say providing direction now. If you wanted to go with the doing it sooner than later, I think providing direction now would allow us to go back to 4J. We'd have to update all of our financial projections that are in the report. We look at all how long it would extend it, what the income would look like. If you wanted to do it later, I mean, at any point, council/agency board could choose to amend the plan, raise the spending limit more, add additional projects. And so there's always that capacity to do that at any point during the life of the district. So if you wanted to see how implementation goes for a couple years and then have the conversation, that's an option too.
Thank you for that. And I really agree with Jennifer saying that we are on the front end of this project. We don't really know what all we're going to need to do to support the riverfront development. We also have the high likelihood of an additional 8 acres of riverfront property coming into the system contiguous with the current, 14 or 16 acres. And we don't know what the needs for that are going to be as well. Boy, at this point, I think I just need to hear more from my colleagues, and I'm really weighing this out. I definitely want to do something. It's just, is it at the 45 level or higher? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lindsay.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with my colleagues. This is a really amazing opportunity to inject some investment into an area that really needs it. We build prosperity and wealth through leveraging debt. I'm very supportive of going as high as we can. I do have some concerns about the timing of it. I want to make sure that we can get this done. And so if we can move forward with agreeing on kind of a number today, if we are going to go higher, I'm supportive of that. Or if we decide to land at the 45 with kind of an idea that in a couple of years we would check back in and see if we need to increase, I would be supportive of that as well. But I think we should make some big, bold moves today if we're able to do that.
Okay, I have Mike for a second round. Does anybody else who hasn't spoken want a first round? Greg, go for it.
Actually, Mayor, I'm on 2 devices, so I just want you to know I'm here. I can listen, but hit me up in the second round.
All right, perfect. So, Mike, I'll let you go. Second round.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mayor. And I don't know if City Manager, there's new information that you may have yet, but every time I've thrown out a number with regard to Station 17, I have faced your questions on that. So I would love to, if you have new numbers, but I know that as another point, we have talked about at budget the idea of a Station 17 that falls in there that we may want to construct at some point. We also have there are some other conversations we've had, but certainly we're in the middle of a housing crisis, and the more we can do to leverage more housing being built downtown, especially in that area, I think the better off we will be economically, and for the standpoint of of how we are dealing with a housing crisis at this time. So I'm certainly at 45, but I could use some guidance from staff about what a better number would be if it was a bigger one based on what we know at the moment, and specifically some of those things I've just mentioned.
I don't have a new number for you on the fire station. We haven't scoped that out. I know you were operating off of a number that may have come from a previous study that looked at actually attaching onto the building. And so, yeah, there's that. We're way preliminarily even kind of trying to determine what is the best siting, if possible, what would that cost? And my point was, I think the number's low, and that's something, if you wanted to put a placeholder in for, like, we want to make sure we have X amount for some facilities, we could provide you with that, but it's also something that probably you could do at a future amendment. And as far as the number on housing, I'll leave that to Amanda and Will if they've scoped that out.
I will add that the fire station would be eligible under other public facilities, so that's one consideration. We haven't given much thought to what a bigger number would be. We know that the handful of folks had proposed $60 million as an increase.
I would be comfortable with at least that, if not more. So if I were staff and if it were just up to me alone, I would say go back and start talking. I haven't heard anyone push back on the downtown, or excuse me, on the riverfront urban renewal. I know there's a significant difference in public sentiment between the downtown urban renewal district and the riverfront urban renewal district. I don't think we should operate based on the worry that someone may object at some point in the future. I think we're at an inflection point for our community, and we've seen not a lot but support at this point. So I would say 60 is minimum for me. I'd be comfortable with a bigger number, but I could use some staff guidance as to what's appropriate for that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from council on this? I guess I would just chime in that I just appreciate the fact that council is so eager to expand this spending limit. And yes, Greg, I'll get to you, and anxious to move forward, which is really great commitment. I have just a little bit of concern about the timing, so that's making me a little nervous. I just really want to make sure that we lock this one in, and we have the option of coming back and revising it when there's more information about the station and other costs. So I've just, you're not closing any doors by doing this. The door is still open for you to go to a higher number later. So just makes me a little nervous to take that chance, but I'm happy to see council be so supportive of this. Greg, you want to first round?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. My thoughts are quite similar to my thoughts on this. I would be comfortable with a higher number. I think that as building costs go up, as other costs for development continue to rise, I think we need to probably take into account that bit of inflation that may make whatever we develop in the area cost a lot more than what it is right now. So I would say, to be on the safe side, I would like to go up to 75 million.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah, I just had a question for Amanda. would it, would you advise us to, we need to pick a number today so you can get going on this right away?
I would say yes. It would be great if we could land on a number. Sounds like, looks like Sarah wants
Well,
to.
I'm sort of torn between, yes, I think the sooner you have a number to go out, the best. I would agree.
Okay, because it feels like people, many people are comfortable going higher, but we're a little unsure of what that magic number is. So, and we don't want to spend a half an hour arguing about numbers. I'm fine with Greg's suggestion of 75. 60 is also good. I don't know that they have a magic formula behind them. So I think the idea is just we want to have money there for those things that come up that we 100% don't know what's going to happen, and to be able to do this part of our community well the first time, instead of having to go back and do things that we wish we could have done initially. It's often more expensive to go back and fix things than it is to do it right the first time. So if someone, I don't know who's going to come up with the number and put it forward, but I'm okay with either of those.
Okay, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. If I can make this motion now and it be appropriate to do so, I would move for council to have staff explore the $75 million number.
Second.
Could you say more about explore as opposed to just
Yeah.
making the
What does that
number
mean?
75?
Following up only in what Amanda mentioned about needing to confer with other jurisdictions, it brings the school district more money. So I don't feel as though they would have any concerns, or it seems less likely. So I'd want them to do their due diligence so that we consider an actual number rather than just talk about the potential.
Okay,
All right. I just want to make sure we have the wording right,
Yeah,
because I essentially feel like you're directing us to replace the number with 75, and then we would go out and do all the things and come back to you to make the final decision. But I just want to make sure if Lauren has a suggestion about the wording, that would be great.
I would suggest just using the suggested motion in the packet, which is move to direct the city manager to bring back for action, which we know if the number is greater than 45 million, in order to bring back the ordinance for action, staff will need to take it back to the school district for concurrence. To bring back for action an ordinance amending the Riverfront Urban Renewal Plan and including a spending limit increase of 75 million.
So moved. And part of that is we don't have to utilize that number.
Correct.
We can do less and likely should as time moves along, but we need to be prepared to do that which we want to do in this particular case. So
I'm seconding Mike's motion.
All right, I'm looking to Catherine because we already had a motion on the table that was seconded. So Catherine.
And I wasn't able to catch the second of the original move forward and explore. I believe it was Councilor Evans. Did you say?
It was me.
So we're just going to consider that one entirely replaced by the motion that Councilor Clark just made, and it was accepted by this.
Okay. Okay, Randy, you have your hand raised.
Sorry, I was going to ask for a friendly amendment to do what just happened. So I'd rather have certainty as we go forward rather than dance around the issue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table as it was in the packet, but raising the limit to 75 million. And any other comments or questions about that? All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? 1. Are there only 6 of you here? Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you. So that passes. Appreciate that. I'm excited that there's such enthusiasm for making those investments in the riverfront. So thank you for that work. And with that, I think we are ready to move on to our second item of this meeting, and I'll turn it back to the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. your second item is this discussion that you're going to have about potential sports bond. And we have a number of staff here that are going to walk you through the three items you've talked about so far, which is the Lane County Multi-Use Center, the regional pickleball facility, and Golden Garden. So we have three different folks that are going to do that. And what I'm hoping happens is that you're able to have get enough of information to know whether you want to broaden this discussion or narrow this discussion, so that we can come back hopefully in December with more details and specifics about something you might want to put forward. So with that, I believe we're kicking off with the Lane County Multi-Use Center. As mentioned ahead of time, I did send you some additional information. Denny's going to cover most of it, but you have some additional information in your inbox.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, I'm going to kick off. I think Craig's going to get the PowerPoint queued up. Craig. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to start with the multi-sport facility at the Lane County Fairgrounds that would be used by the Eugene Emeralds. And I'm just going to summarize kind of how we got here, what we know about the design and the cost today, potential uses of the facility, operating plans, financing plans. As Sarah mentioned, we did reach out to the county and we sent a bunch of questions regarding these details. There's not a lot of new information in the information that Sarah sent out, but I'll try to capture some of the responses we've gotten from the county throughout the presentation. But I'm going to start with the M's. We all know the M's have been in the community for a long time, since 1955, 68 years. They're owned by the Elmore Group, which has owned the M's for 41 years. You know, they played at Civic, then in 2010, they moved to PK Park. So I'm going to kind of start in 2020 and try to frame kind of where they are and why the M's and why we're all here talking about a stadium. So you can go to the next slide, Craig. In 2020, Major League Baseball took over the minor league baseball system. So really two big things happened. First, they moved the M's from short A level to high A level, which is a good thing. They increased the number of games that the M's play every year from about 76 per year to about 132 per year. At the same time, Major League Baseball also introduced a bunch of new stadium standards that all minor league baseball stadiums had to meet, things like locker rooms and lighting and training facilities and so forth. And PK Park did not meet those standards. There are about 120 minor league baseball stadiums across the country. And these new standards has really caused cities across the country who have made minor league baseball to consider the possibility of having to upgrade their existing stadiums or building new stadiums. So Eugene is not a unique problem across the whole minor league system. And it's really not a problem that was created by the M's or the city or the U of O or the county. It's really stadium standards that have been imposed by Major League Baseball. So the M's approached this in late 2020 to discuss the possibility of finding a new site for a baseball stadium. At the same time, they were working with the U of O to determine if it was possible to upgrade PK Park to meet those standards. Ultimately, both the U of O and the M's determined that there were just too many conflicts. Scheduling, operational conflicts, wear and tear on the facility. The M's actually play more games than the U of O. And the M's players didn't have access to the field for practice for the most part because the U of O team is using the facility most of the time. And that was a major issue for the players union who want access to a training facility. So that's kind of how we got here. Next slide. The M's have made it clear that they really want to stay in Eugene. They've been very successful here. They developed a model minor league baseball program and operation that gets a lot of recognition across the country. They've developed a lot of community support, which is evidenced by a lot of emails that we see. They provided a lot of support to the community as well over the 68 years that they've been in Eugene. The Lane County Fairgrounds opportunity eventually moved to the top of the list after looking at a bunch of different options. So the yellow highlighted area that you see there is generally where the stadium would sit on the fairground site. And it fits in the northwest corner. It does overlap the livestock building there in right field. So that building would likely need to be relocated as part of the project. The next slide. The county and the M's, they worked together to develop a conceptual design and a cost estimate to determine the feasibility of a new multi-use stadium project. This is the conceptual design for the fairgrounds site that was developed by the county M's project team. And it shows how the stadium would be incorporated into the fairgrounds, sitting up against 13th Avenue. The plan would be to use the facility as a multi-use facility. So when it's not being used by the M's, it could be used and made available for other community events like concerts and youth sporting events, graduations, other community events. The conceptual design includes a capacity for 4,200 that could be expanded to approximately 10,000. And that's a plus or minus number. It's not really a hard number. But the capacity could be expanded for large events like concerts. That's at least the concept. It also has indoor gathering space that could be used by the community. It has a kids' playground area that they intend to have open to the community year-round as well. Regarding the operating plan, which is key, the county has indicated that a long-term operating agreement is being discussed with the M's, but that has not yet been finalized. So that is one of the questions that we have. At this point, however, it is assumed that the facility will be owned by Lane County. The stadium would be leased by the M's as the anchor tenant for part of the year. The M's have indicated that they are interested in a long-term 20 or 30-year lease with options to extend beyond that term, so they hope to be there for a long time. The M's have expressed an interest in managing, marketing, and programming the facility for non-M's events in partnership with the county. And because the M's are already doing that business, and it allows them to keep their staff fully engaged, employed throughout the year, they're really interested in taking on a big part of the program in the space when they're not using it. They're also anticipating that the county and possibly the city may want to have a certain number of dates per year or something to use the facility, but none of those details are figured out at this point. The county has indicated that they're looking at various revenue sources such as ticket and parking surcharges and other facility lease revenue as a means for funding operating expenses and establishing a capital replacement reserve. We don't have that detail at this point, but just for scale, they sell over 200,000 tickets a year. So when you're thinking about a ticket surcharge, that's kind of the gravity of it. Next slide, please. At previous council meetings, Sarah shared these numbers. They really haven't changed, which are the estimated project costs for the facility and the potential sources of funds for the project. Again, the total project cost is estimated at $100 million, which includes approximately $90 million for the multi-use stadium, another $10 million to relocate the existing livestock building to accommodate the stadium. The county has indicated that most of the value engineering to get the project costs down have already been done. So at this point, that $100 million project cost has remained pretty firm. At this point in the project, the funds that have been identified as secured for the capital construction of the project include $7.5 million approved from the state of Oregon, $1.5 million approved from the Fed's Emergency Management Facility Utilization Program. There's $35 million that is assumed to come from a 2% increase in the transient room tax and car rental tax, and the county board took action to increase that tax, but they still need to approve how much of that increase would be dedicated to the multi-use facility. And they're expecting to consider that in the second quarter of 2024. The proposed contribution from the owners, at least as described by the M's, towards the capital construction cost is approximately $13.5 million, which includes $10 million in prepaid rent that was calculated at $500,000 a year over 20 years, but all paid up front, plus approximately $3.5 million towards equipment and fixtures for the project, which are part of the facility and used by all the users, things like concession equipment, tables, chairs, and et cetera. And I would just note that this prepaid lease concept is very similar to what the M's did with the U of O. They prepaid a lease for PK Park in the amount of $2 million in order to help the U of O build PK Park. That obviously leaves a sizable funding gap of $43 million. At this point, the county has not discussed or has considered a countywide bond measure, at least at this point. But as we understand today, the strategy to address this gap at this point includes a second rounds of funds from the state, which was pursued unsuccessfully in the last session. But there's still hope in the upcoming legislative session, and there is an effort underway, as our understanding, for a combined ask from both the M's and the Hillsborough Hops, who are also trying to build a new stadium. The intent is to continue pursue the second round of funding from the feds in the amount of $1.5 million. And as discussed previously, the M's are looking for $15 million towards the capital construction costs from the city. So if the state, the city, the feds, all of those funds were secured, that would have put the capital project funding at approximately $80 million. The M's owners have indicated that they would look to their own private fundraising, sponsorships, naming rights, donations, et cetera, to start to close that gap. But at this point, it's not clear how much of that gap could be closed by the M's ownership, but they would be moving at least closer to the targeted amount if all of those other sources came to fruition. Obviously, and hopefully the forthcoming details regarding the operating plan will also be critical, because it will ultimately determine the functional and financial success of the facility after it's built, and it'll ultimately inform whether an investment makes sense for us or not. So that's information in detail that we're really hoping to get in the near future. So I'm going to kick it over to one of the Craigs, Craig Carnegie, to talk about pickleball.
All right, thank you, Denny. I am here to provide a brief overview of the Emerald Valley Pickleball Club's project to build a regional pickleball facility on the campus of Lane Community College. As you know, pickleball has seen explosive growth across the nation and locally over the last several years, and the number of courts available locally has not kept up with this demand. The city of Eugene currently has 5 public sites with a total of 10 dedicated courts and 12 hybrid pickleball tennis courts. We could easily use twice this amount right now, and this need is only expected to grow. The Emerald Valley Pickleball Club, a 501c3 nonprofit, picked up this need for more courts and began to actively seek partnerships in the community to expand the number of courts in the area. At the LCC site, they are proposing 24 lighted courts, 10 which will be covered. LCC will own the facility and the club will manage and operate it, and will be open to the general public. The club has been working to raise $5 million in capital for this project. Lane County voters passed a levy last year that contributed $500,000 toward this goal. The remaining funds are being sought from both private and public organizations. The club approached the city last year as well, seeking between $500,000 and $750,000 in financial support. The only eligible source of funding the Parks Division has for this project is system development charges. It would take council action to place this project on the SDC project list. And right now, all park SDC funds are currently planned for use on other park projects like Santa Clara Community Park and Mattie Reynolds Park. Many of these planned park projects are likely to have pickleball courts in their design, such as at the recently completed Stryker Field Park. However, there are conflicts on smaller sites with the sound pickleball makes and adjacent property owners' concerns. So siting these courts in smaller parks will likely be challenging. And a regional facility would both help alleviate the current demand for the courts and reduce the pressure to build new courts in many neighborhood parks. And with that brief overview, I will pass it along to Craig Smith to talk about Golden Gardens.
Great, thanks, Craig. I'm going to give a little bit of background first on the need for a sports complex. So the first identified need for more sports field in the Eugene community came from the 1995 Metropolitan Sports Commission report. And based on that recommendation, it led to an agreement with both local school districts and the city of Eugene to start building artificial turf rectangle fields at the schools. So we now have 11 turf fields that were built on top of grass fields that are dedicated to both school use and community-wide use through an agreement. In 2016, the Parks and Recreation Needs Assessment, based on the continued growth in the community by youth and adult sports leagues, again clarified the need for more sports fields that still exist in the community. So the concept of a moderately sized sports complex was identified, and Golden Gardens Park is identified as the appropriate location. In 2017, the City of Eugene partnered with Travel Lane County to hire a consultant and complete a feasibility study for a regional sports complex. Travel Lane County was aware and interested in the impact that a local sports complex would have on our transit room tax. The consultant's recommendation was for a moderately sized complex that included a combination of 6 multi-purpose rectangle fields and 10 versatile diamond fields for both softball and baseball. The design of the complex would meet the immediate needs of the community while also creating revenue that would maintain the facility and also finally create more transit room tax for the benefit of the overall region. Most importantly, though, local teams would not have to travel all over the state or the West Coast to go to tournaments. This feasibility study confirmed again that Golden Gardens is the right size location with the right amount of accessibility and really the only viable property that is currently owned by the City of Eugene. So in 2018, the Parks and Recreation System Plan incorporated the recommendation of the feasibility study, and we placed Golden Gardens as a project on the 2018 Parks and Recreation Bond. Now that project only included completing a master plan for the park and potentially building a couple rectangle fields on site. So we are now currently in the middle of the Golden Gardens master planning process with Cameron McCarthy as a consultant. We have completed part 2 of a 3-part community engagement process. So the final recommendations and concept design have not yet been made. Can you change the slide there, Craig? So this is one of the renderings of a potential design created during the second community engagement process. You'll notice that this design includes 6 rectangle fields, and that would be on the left side of the slide or the west side of Golden Gardens, and 8 diamond fields, mostly on the east boundary line of the Golden Gardens Park. It also includes a neighborhood park, which is in the lower right corner of the property. And then you'll notice the ponds in the middle of the park, which are a big feature that already exists. And maintaining the safety and protection of the western pond turtle is at the forefront in this project. You can do that by creating an appropriate buffer from the ponds, moving the current walking path away from the west side of the ponds, which happen to be the primary nesting grounds for the pond turtle, and also potentially building a protective berm. And then finally, concerning the fields themselves, where our research on the options related to what type of turf should be laid down. We are aware of the concerns about synthetic turf, but we're also aware of the critical need to have fields that can be used all year round in this complex. So finally, in response to the question of what size of a bond is appropriate for the entire sports complex, we do not at this time have that cost projection available. We need to wait until the final recommendations are completed in phase 3 of the master planning process. But we did ask our consultants, Cameron McCarthy, to project what a phase 1 bond might look like, primarily focusing on rectangle fields as the first phase. The sizes of those 3 options were already shared in that was 15 million, 25 million, and 35 million. So when you look at this, the most important part to understand in these projections is that there is a baseline of about 5 to 9 million for site infrastructure that is needed prior to building in any of the fields. It would be site infrastructure, design, and engineering costs, but before we get into the fields or the turtle habitat protection or other park amenities. So in the base scope of 15 million, you could have 2 rectangle fields added, 50% of western pond turtle habitat protection enhancement work done, the walking and running trails, restrooms and concessions, and maybe some neighborhood amenities, park amenities. The middle-sized scope, $25 million bond would include 4 rectangle fields and complete Western Pond Turtle habitat protection enhancement scope, and again, restrooms, concessions, and some park amenity improvements. And then finally, a large scope of 35 million would include 6 rectangle fields and all the other amenities that are associated with that. So with that, I'll now turn it over to Twyla to go over the bond numbers.
Thank you, Craig. So good afternoon. I'm Twyla Miller, the Chief Financial Officer, and I just have a few things related to tax impacts of bonds. As we've discussed before, the city can issue general obligation bonds for a non-city owned facility as long as the facility is in public ownership. So we've run a really high level analysis on the impact of taxpayers for the 3 bond scenarios. So in each of the scenarios, there's a $15 million included for the Lane County multi-use facility, $750,000 towards the regional pickleball facility, and then for each option presented today related to the Golden Gardens Sports Complex as shown here. So for these scenarios, we've assumed a 20-year general obligation bond, an assumed interest rate of 6.5% given current market conditions, property tax collection rate of 94%, and we've utilized assessed values and home values from the Lane County Assessor's Office to estimate the tax rates and costs shown here, which reflect the average over the first 5 years of the bond for each scenario. So that just gives an idea of the tax impact to the taxpayers under each of these 3 scenarios. And with that, that's the end of our presentation today. We can open things up for questions and conversation. Thank you.
Okay, I want to thank you all for those presentations. I think it provides us with a good foundation for a conversation. So I see Mike already with his hand up. Take it away, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. First, I want to channel Councilor Semple, who's not at the table today, to say I would be in favor of separating each of these 3 questions rather than grouping them all together. I think each has their own considerations that are important to make separately. But as it regards to Golden Gardens, I also want to kind of look back a little bit as somebody who sat around the table for a while and remember that it was one of the first things that occurred in my service on council, I think it was in 07 or 08, that the 2 young people who perished in the ponds and their parents coming to council and giving testimony about their kids who drowned. And there are very few things I've heard at that table that were as moving. And I just want to say that the whole reason we brought it into the consideration for creating the park in the first place was for children's safety who were generally around the area and using the facility and creating a facility that was more safe for kids. And so that's going to be, no matter how we send this out and which design we end up on, children's safety for me will be the primary consideration. And it was making something useful out of a dangerous situation. And so I'm less inclined to leave it alone and let it exist in the wild as it did, as it was initially it was initially a gravel operation. And so I'd like to see it developed and create a good deal more safety especially for young people out there. So I will certainly want to hear my colleagues' thoughts on that as we move forward with this. But I think primary consideration of safety is an important one on a regional sports facility like that as a park. I think that the community deserves the opportunity to make a decision on the EMS facility separate from these. They're both worthy projects, and I know that Councilor Zelenka has done some work already on the pickleball question, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. But I think we ought to consider each of these questions separately, and if we send anything out as a bond, I think the community ought to consider it separately as well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have Alan, then Jennifer, then Randy.
Yeah, I think we should look at them separately as well. Actually, I'm in favor of just a simple, clean stadium only $15 million bond. I've long said that that would be my preferred approach to this. Put it out for a vote. If people want to vote for it, great. That's their option to do that. And the people that are in real support that we're getting cards and letters from and emails can create the campaign to get a yes vote for it. As far as the Golden Gardens, I think it's premature to bring this to the table at this point. There's still a stakeholder meeting left to go, and there's, in my mind, too many unanswered questions and too many issues that still need discussing in order to move forward in anything on the Golden Gardens at this time. And as far as pickleball is concerned, what they're looking for is $750,000 in Parks SDCs, which we can do outside of this process. I sent a motion around last night that kind of tipped my hand at a draft of what that would look like moving forward. I don't intend to make that motion today. That's for a later date, later this year. And I'm not sure tying the success of pickleball funding to the stadium vote is something that the pickleball folks are looking forward to. And I think that should actually be separate. I think it's easier and less complex to just have a yes, no vote on the M's and the stadium. Twyla, you had the last slide. Maybe I missed a slide, but do you have just this plain old 50 million for the stadium scenario?
1 moment. I can get that for you. We have run some numbers previously. I'll try to pull that up, but if not, I can provide them. Yes.
Wouldn't it be just roughly half of that first option?
About, yeah.
And what was that? That was how much per person per year on average? That was like 30. Can you pull that slide up? Basically, be half of that, I suspect, if it was just 15 million for the stadium.
Yeah. So
40.
The average tax, 46. So 20 something.
23-ish. Okay. I think that's a reasonable number that won't freak too many people out, especially for the benefit that the M's that we all agree bring to the community. It's a matter of where the funding comes from, and a bond makes a lot more sense to me than I'm not willing to cut fire and libraries and police department to fund the stadium, but I would be willing to have a vote on a bond. So that's where I would like to see us go, just a simple, clean stadium only, $15 million. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer, then Randy.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I am also not willing to cut fire and police and other services for a stadium, which is why I have some concerns about putting forward a bond measure, at least at this point where we still don't have any kind of operations plan. It sounds like Denny was explaining we're still waiting for that kind of information. And Denny, I just wanted to clarify, it sounds like from the email that while the county has considered allocating that TLT money, they actually haven't made a commitment yet. Is that correct?
That's correct. They've taken the step to increase. The 2% increase has been approved, but they haven't decided how that would be allocated across different potential uses.
Right. So, and so Denny, I have another question, and I may have missed this in all of the information we got, but the 15 million, do we know how that number was calculated?
That's a common question. When we sat down with the M's and their ownership group, basically what they've said is they're asking the state for 15 million. they had a way to calculate the county's participation, the land value, and some other things, and they came up with a number of roughly $15 million from the county. The owners are in the $15 million neighborhood with their $13.5 million contribution. So basically, they didn't want to, the way it was framed for us was they didn't want to overextend the ask beyond what the owners were doing, the state was doing, the county was doing. And so that's how they derived the $15 million ask.
Okay, but the owner's money is rent that they won't have to pay. They'll get kind of like, they're prepaying it, so they'll get to just not pay for a while, and then they'll have to start paying again. That's that correct? Or that's what we think is happening, since we don't really have a contract.
There's nothing agreed to or signed, so that it's, I think it's I would characterize it as the way the M's would like to contribute to the project, like they did for the U of O. So they have some experience with that model. But yeah, that's their preferred way to participate, at least in that share. I just mentioned too that there's still a gap, and they would have to figure out how to secure other private funding, which is an owner responsibility. So any other dollars that come in, sponsorships and all those things, would be, in their minds, an owner contribution as well, because they would be responsible for going to get that money, not the city or the county.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, I think this is really hard. Clearly the M's are a beloved local team, but I think we have a really high responsibility of how we use or ask for tax money, considering the fact that the county hasn't yet fully committed funds to their own project. That is concerning. The fact that we don't have the information we need to make such a huge decision is concerning. We have a similar sized funding gap of our own that we need to deal with, and we have a revenue team we've asked to talk about it, and yet this is a bond is one of the tools they might choose to suggest out of the toolbox. And if we use it for this, we're not using it for something else. I don't want to be in a position where I'm cutting essential services because we asked the voters for money and it's going for a baseball stadium instead of our police or fire or parks or libraries. Or that would not be a position I would be happy for us to be in. So I think it's just too soon to be making a decision like this without the information that we need. That's kind of where I am, but I'm really curious to hear what other people are feeling.
Okay, thank you, Randy, and then Lindsay.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, all three of you for the four of you for the presentation. I think that was very helpful. I'm kind of landing where Alan and some of the rest of you have said, with dividing the multi-use stadium out from the other issues, which, you know, I made this motion, but I was trying to think more all-encompassing of what we needed. But as we divide those out, I'd like to flag something for staff. I did have a conversation with Babe Ruth Baseball, and they have a significant need for lighting at the Babe Ruth Baseball Complex, which would take those 4 fields they have and extend an extra play period each day when they're playing ball, which would be helpful as well. But anyway, back to the stadium. I agree. We have some questions that are still unanswered that we need to get answers from. Sarah, what is the likelihood that we could have answers to these questions from the county and what they are and aren't going to do prior to our council break, winter break?
I think it's going to depend on the extent of your questions and the deeper you want to go in, and if it has to be a Board of County Commissioners. Like if one of your questions is, will the Board of County Commissioners float a countywide bond? I believe Steve will need to take that to them for a discussion. So it's a matter of when he can get that on their calendar.
I'm not even thinking about a countywide bond. I mean, that would be great, but
I was just using that one as an example of the kinds of, like, you know, if it needs to go to the Board of County Commissioners for Steve to get clarity, I would have to reach out to him and see, like, can he do that before break? I think some of your, you know, I just don't know what, like, of all the questions we've answered, which ones do you say, hey, here's where we need more?
Well, to start with, I think we need how serious are they on their commitment with their own funding strategy for this piece that they've already been working on with Eugene Ems? I would like to hear that back. But I just wanted to comment on the bond. First of all, our deficit is operational and it's ongoing, and you don't use bond money for ongoing operations. That would be more like a levy. So I really see a one-time money bond, and since it would be a county facility, I don't see us having any responsibility for the ongoing operations and maintenance, and I think we need to make that clear. But with that said, one of our options may be a levy to support the gap in our ongoing costs. But again, that's different than one-time dollars produced by a bond. So if we can keep those kind of separate, I mean, there's a little crossover with, the money's coming from the same source, the taxpayer. At the same time, if we are going to assist with this, timing is somewhat important right now if we want to see this done. So I certainly understand and agree with the interest in getting more information, but I think we need to press the county a little bit and say, hey, if you're going forward with this, before we can fully commit, we need answers to these basic questions. So I may need a second round, Mayor, but I'll wait and hear what others have to say. Thank you.
All right, got you. All right, Lindsay.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm supportive of dividing these three projects. I don't think that none of them are fleshed out enough to really make that decision. Especially not today. With maybe the exception of the pickleball facility, I think that's a solid proposal. I'm very supportive of putting them on the list of eligible projects. Happy to support that whenever that comes up, if that's today or a future date. The Golden Gardens Park, I think there's a lot of questions in terms of protecting habitat for what is soon to be classified as an endangered species. There's definitely concerns about the use of synthetic turf that, we're still in these draft design phases. So when you look at the minimum buffer for what's recommended by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, some of the, all the designs are kind of encroaching in on that buffer. And I'd like to just see more about how we're approaching that and how we're ensuring that we're not destroying a very biodiverse ecosystem that's there at the Golden Gardens. I frequent that area with my kids often. It is a very unique and special place. And then in terms of the Ems, I mean, I in a lot of ways, I feel like we're all kind of playing chicken, all of these different entities saying like, I want to wait for the county to make a decision. And, the county is probably saying, well, if the city is going to put in their money and the state, and we're all just kind of in this waiting zone. And so I think it's going to take us making a decision to say, I'm going to support this for everyone to kind of get on board and make sure that it's a viable project. That being said, like it feels really unstable and not ready for that. But if it comes down to it, I would support creating a bond for the voters to decide if we're going to move forward with that project and support that project, but definitely on its own terms and not combined with these other projects. So that's where I'm at today, and I appreciate the ability to kind of talk about all of these together today, even though I want to divide them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have Mike and Randy both with a second round, but I just wanted to check in because talking about the M Stadium. First of all, it makes a lot of sense to me to divide these up into three different conversations because they're all at different stages and have different needs and criteria. The M Stadium, even if we pass a bond, even if the voters pass a bond for 15 million, is likely to still come up very short. And, in our earlier conversations, we talked about 15 million really isn't a very big number for a bond. So I guess I just want to pose the question of if you're going to put out a bond for the M Stadium? Does it need to be bigger? Like, if the voters really want that project to go through, what would it look? I mean, what do we really need? And or is there an opportunity to do something jointly with the county that bumps up everybody's contribution? So maybe that's a more robust conversation, but it just strikes me that we're going through a very kind of challenging process here, and we're coming up with a dollar amount that is kind of arbitrary and actually doesn't, I mean, it helps, but it doesn't do the whole piece. So I'm not, I just guess I wanted to open that up for conversation. I'm not standing my ground on that it should go up or down, but I think if we're going to consider it, what are we really trying to do? I will just say that I have some ambivalence about moving on the M's timeline before the Revenue Committee has had a chance to meet. And I'm hearing you, Randy, and your thoughts that these are different things. But as you also said, this all goes out to the voters, and we have a challenge. And I just don't want us to appear to be tripping over ourselves, that we're putting out a bond request on one hand, and yet we're still trying to figure out whether we're going to do something else. I mean, I just feels the sequence doesn't feel particularly comfortable to me in terms of sort of reaching out to the public and how that looks. So those are my concerns. Okay, so I have Mike and then Randy, and it looks like the manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I too, like my colleagues, like Randy said, I want to hear from the county that they're a little farther down the road in terms of commitment, and that they're further down the road with regard to their involvement financially. I mean, it may be that we want to hear them say that they've committed TRT to this, or, some of the financial strategies that they've developed for this from the county, so that we know we're entering this together as partners with this. I hear what Jennifer is saying with regard to the Revenue Committee, but we've spent an additional, manager, you may want to correct me here, but I asked you this once before, that, if you go back 2 years, 3 years, we're spending another $8 or $9 million a year on our response to homelessness than we did just 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So I certainly wouldn't want to compare off or choose to sacrifice first responders or police response or anything like it compared to the deficit that we have. But we haven't had a very public conversation about the fairly large increase we've committed to in very recent years that we may not be able to afford. And I think it's appropriate to compare it from what the increase in spending came from. I really also would love to hear staff say something, help me understand something here with Golden Gardens. I've read a number of emails, and I've heard some of my colleagues refer to areas of Golden Gardens as a natural area, and I want to know what defines a natural area. Those are gravel pits that aren't gravel pits anymore. So what makes them suddenly a natural area? I mean, is there an evolution in process of something that made them that we've done and we dubbed them a natural area after they were gravel pits? I mean, what makes them that? If I could hear someone from Parks tell me about that.
Yeah, Craig Carney might be able to answer that, but I know that we put a lot of work into those ponds when the youth died, and that because of that, we've discovered the western pond turtle, and we've also built trails in that area, and there's a lot of bird wildlife out there. And so the natural area that is tagged that or termed that is based on people walking around those ponds and bird watching and enjoying those trails. Now, doesn't consist of the whole Golden Gardens Park, which is still farmland around that. But when you really talk about natural area and where people enjoy walking, it's mostly around the ponds that have a lot of bird watching going on in the area. But the definition of natural area, I'd have to leave that up to Craig.
I think you pretty much hit that, Craig Smith. It's basically just regenerated, and natural native vegetation has come back and created habitat that was once there, and new habitat that has encouraged additional wildlife to come. So, the community, the local community has sort of adopted it as a natural area, and we have continued to try to manage that over the years as such. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Randy, and then I'm going to turn it over to the manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to start off with something I failed to mention in the first round. We talk about the 2 young people who drowned in the Golden Garden ponds. There were actually 3 separate incidents that I know of, and I know that because I was there as a young firefighter and I was in the water on 2 of them. So it has been a hazardous spot for a long time. And what made it more hazardous when an emergency happened, their friends had to run to somebody's house to call 911. So the response was delayed from the get-go. And I think our first priority in everything we do is making sure we do the best we can to protect the public. As far as how to proceed with this thing, I do believe this is an issue that needs to go to the voters. I would certainly not support anything that would take away from our critical services, police, fire, and other areas that we actually need to have the health, safety, and welfare of the community provided for. At the same time, I agree with Councilor Leach. It almost feels like, I wouldn't call it a game of chicken, but it's more like chicken and egg, which comes first. And, somebody needs to make a movement. And I'm wondering if we could, and it doesn't have to be today because I think we do need more information, but could we vote on whether or not to refer a bond measure to the public and say, this is contingent on the county doing and spell out what needs to happen, just so at least there is a pathway forward. Anyway, I just wanted to say that and suggest that, and then also say that I also at the same time I do understand the reticence from both Councilor Ye and the mayor of being concerned about the revenue teams, but I do believe we can bifurcate this in a way that would be reasonable. So my hope is that we can still try before break to firm something up with either an up or down vote from us to refer or not to refer, and then put some strings on it before it actually goes to the voters. They have to be met by the county, because I keep hearing from them, they're waiting to see if the city is going to support the $15 million contribution. And at some point, we just have to get down to what everybody's doing, and are we serious about this or are we not? And based on the overwhelming feedback we've been getting from the community for the past year, I think we owe it to the public to at least give them the final say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to sort of address some of that last piece about how to move forward, but there's a couple of things that were said that I would just offer some opinion. This is a work session, so I'm going to sort of engage in the conversation a little bit. To your point about the, is the number high enough or not? I think, and whether the 15 million is arbitrary, I think for some of us, it's felt like the arbitrariness was more, if you take the gap and you separate it out, but it was like, oh, the city, and here's what we've determined the city's contribution is. I think that felt a little bit arbitrary to some, but it is the ask that they've put forward and the number they've said they need from the city. And I do have a concern that for every dollar you go above that is a dollar not coming from someplace else. And so just be clear about that. And then, on this, I think we don't have the capacity to, and we all use these words different, but the word partner to me might mean something different than it might mean to Councilor Clark when he uses it. We don't have the capacity to partner with the county on this project or be a partner in a multi-use facility, especially given that we weren't part of the design and understanding of how it's going to operate. I see us more as being an investor. This would be a $15 million City of Eugene community investment, not we're partnering on this facility, because that would need a lot more discussion. I do agree with Councilor Groves that I think having a separate project that is a one-time capital project is not as confusing as the revenue. We were actually hoping that we could get through this conversation before you were talking about revenue to try to keep them separate, but they're going to overlap a little bit. But I see that. So what I was going to suggest is we could come back in early December, and I think that what I'm hearing so far is there is at least a majority of you that want to separate these three out. Feels like a lot of questions still on well, probably on all of them, but on the stadium, a little bit more information. And I think we could come back with a process or with a recommendation about how you could proceed with that include something like what Councilor Groves was talking about, which is, hey, we're willing to put this on the May ballot or the November ballot if, the county or whoever is committed to the funding by whatever date. And they would have to do that by February, I think, for you to put it. I think February is our deadline. It feels like Golden Gardens to me is the least like, it doesn't have an urgent timeline like we've been told with the baseball facility. And so it could be decoupled a bit. And then the pickleball discussion, I think, Councilor Zelenka, we had given you a little bit of modified language that would answer a few questions for you to determine whether you want to move forward with that just being an SDC resolution or whether you would want to include that as the bond. And we could bring that back. So I guess my recommendation coming forward to your next meeting is if you don't want to move forward with Golden Gardens right now, let's stop talking about it. And let's only come back with information around the M's and around the pickleball and potentially SDCs. Only because it's a lot of work to keep doing it. And I think the community is going to continue to engage. And if you're really not going to move that forward, let's not continue to do that. So we could make that final decision in December. But if you know you're not going to want to do it, it'd be great to kind of get a sense of head nods today.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate everyone's thoughts today, and City Manager, I appreciate you weighing in. Also, I have had an ongoing concern that separating our ongoing budget discussions from this doesn't feel like it's a good idea to me, only because I understand there are differences between fees and bonds and levies. Like we all get that. But when you're paying your taxes, they don't feel different, right? It's all coming out of the same pot. And we know our community is not a wealthy community. Many folks are struggling right now today to pay their bills. So adding on to that burden, it should be for something that really matters, and we should take it very seriously. So, but am I understanding what you said, Sarah, is that you would prefer to separate these discussion?
Well, my sense was that if the majority of the council was going to want to move forward with a bond, that decision would sort of be made and not confuse the whole rest of the revenue discussion. Your point is extremely well taken. So if you're going to do it regardless, and that's kind of how it felt like it was moving forward, I think trying to talk about them both at the same time is going to be a little bit more challenging.
If you're going to do it anyway, let me know now. Is that kind of,
I mean, just so that the conversations are somewhat separate.
Yeah.
And the revenue committee is not also tasked with trying to figure that out too, if you really do indeed plan on just moving that forward.
Okay. That is helpful. I still don't feel like it's smart to pretend that they somehow don't affect each other. It feels like the budget, I mean, we all know how hard the budget process was recently. And, we're at a point now that we're talking about a lot of jobs and a lot of real people in our community who could be out of work because we have to start making serious cuts. And pretending that and a baseball stadium are equivalent, I don't know. I'm very uncomfortable with where we're at. I think that's probably obvious. And I think the added level of not having the information I feel like I need is increasing that anxiety. You know, I appreciate staff saying that you're going to try to get us more information. Maybe, you know, operation costs and more contract information and more buy-in from the county will alleviate some of that. But right now, it just doesn't feel like a good investment to me, you know. But I really appreciate this. And I do agree also about separating the 3 projects. I really appreciate, Alan, what you sent us. I think he's on the right track there about the information we need and separating it from this. So thank you, Alan, for that.
Okay, I have Greg for a first round, and then I'll circle back to you, Alan.
Yeah, I don't want to be redundant, but I think that Councilor Ye captured a lot of my sentiments. And in terms of the 3 projects, I think with Golden Gardens, we're looking at a longer arc and a longer horizon on that. I don't think that this is going to come to fruition if we've already started now to some extent with the planning process, but I think that we are looking at somewhere between 8 and 12 years before we actually come to fruition on that particular parcel of land and what we want to ultimately develop on it. I think that the second thing, as far as the pickleball court is concerned, is probably the easiest of all of the asks that we have in front of us today. So, you know, I would like to move forward with that. And I know that we have a time-sensitive issue around the stadium, but I'm much more in favor of putting this in the hands of the voters and letting them decide what they want to do with that, and you know how much money that they want to spend on the stadium, given the fact that you know, we would be contributing money to the construction of the stadium without a lot of ROI, return on investment, for the city itself. So I think that those are the things I'm really focused on, and I think that we need to divide these out into 3 separate categories so that we can treat them with the respect that they need as distinct proposals and move forward from there.
Okay, thank you for that. Alan.
Yeah, to me, there have been sufficient number of citizens' input to show that the stadium issue is important enough of an issue with a sufficient number of people to act on it. And I think what we need to do is come up with a way to signal to the other folks involved in this, not our partners, that we support this, and if the details are worked out, we put out a bond vote for this, so that part of our intent is clear. So if the city council could figure out how to make that intent clear, that would be probably a really good step forward. You don't necessarily have to act on a bond right away. We can wait for the details to get hammered out a little bit more to satisfy the folks that, including myself, that feel like there's just not enough there yet. On Golden Gardens, I agree, it's just not ready to move forward yet. So I would, there's a lot more conversation to be had there, including some stakeholder meetings that are coming up. And then on pickleball, I intend to bring back a motion adding pickleball to the SDC project list, which I shared a draft with you all. My intention, Sarah, was to have a memo come with the analysis along with the resolution so that we could read it and then bring it up, discuss it, and take action on it, yes or no. And the same meeting, one meeting. It's not that complicated of an issue to merit multiple bites at that apple. So I think a memo with the analysis and a resolution, and then the council can decide, would be what I'd be asking for in that motion. And the timing of that isn't, we don't do that we need to make that motion to have that come back to us, but we don't have to take the final action for a while.
Okay, thank you. So I don't think that we need a motion on the table. I think it's clear, Manager, I'm just looking to you that you have enough direction to come back on more information about the stadium for a December meeting.
Yeah, it feels like the stadium, and maybe we touch on the pickleball piece with the memo that Councilor Zink is referring to. That's sort of feels like that. It's not as time sensitive, but it's in that way. And if I can just see a couple, like, unless people are like, no, you've got it wrong, we won't come back in December with a further discussion about Golden Gardens, and we'll hold that until just a little bit later.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I think
sounds good. Yeah.
You know, I didn't think at the beginning of this meeting we could get through this conversation and end on time. So I'm very grateful to you all for your concise comments and your thoughtfulness and the process, and staff for all the information you brought. And with that, we are adjourned.
Thanks.